Here in Barcelona, the battle over Catalonia's independence has swung, at least for now, in favour of the Spanish government. Madrid is in full control now of the region, and there's been little or no sign of the democratic resistance that the separatists had been asking for. My guest here is Alfred Bosch, leader of the pro-independence Republican Left on the city council here. Will he now admit that the movement has bitten off way more than it can chew? Alfred Bosch, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you.
A new country has been born. Those were your words, big words, a couple of days ago. You spoke too soon, didn't you?
No, because the Republic has been proclaimed. And now it's a newly born baby. It's small, it's fragile, and we have to make it grow.
A baby from which the leaders have already fled to Belgium to escape possible arrest. That's hardly a glorious start to it, is it?
Well, we might see, again, something we hadn't seen in Europe for decades, which is politicians looking for political asylum within Europe. So that's a development we should follow closely.
But that's not a glorious start to your republic, is it?
It shows the nature of the Spanish state and how something which has been eminently democratic, which has been done to respond to a popular mandate, something like that is absolutely questioned and persecuted by the Spanish powers. So
it shows the nature of your leaders that the first sign of trouble, they run away, don't they?
Well, obviously we need to pursue an international agenda, and the best place to do that is Brussels, isn't it?
This isn't pursuing an international agenda. This is running away, isn't it? Let's call it what it is. This wasn't planned, was it? That they would go off on some trip to consult foreign powers. This was to get away from the possibility of being arrested, wasn't it?
Well,
that's the sole reason.
Well, obviously the prosecutor came out yesterday and he stated all the accusations, the offences which hang on these people. Now, one of them is rebellion, which could mean up to 30 years in jail. The other one is sedition, up to 15 years, etc. And you have...
And that was a surprise? They hadn't considered that?
Well, that's a bit disproportionate, isn't it? For somebody who has been democratically elected, who has organized a vote, and afterwards tries to deliver on that vote. Now, for once that politicians deliver, we might as well respect them.
They really hadn't considered that possibility.
They did,
that
obviously.
The Spanish state would level charges. Not that it has done yet, but it's considering it.
Okay, now the question is, why is half of the Catalan government here in town, in Barcelona? Why is the other half in Brussels? Obviously, the half which is in Brussels is pursuing the international agenda. The Catalan Republic has to be recognized.
You know perfectly well, Mr. Bosch, they didn't intend to go. They got frightened, they got cold feet, and they ran away. What commander leaves the battlefield in the middle of the battle? What kind of example is that to everybody? I mean, there they are, telling everybody to resist democratically, and they run as fast as their legs will carry them.
Well, perhaps we should interview your views and try to find your views, because you seem to know very well what these people are thinking and why they're doing these things. I'm trying to give you my vision of this from within. And what I know is that there's right now 2 people in jail. They're accused of sedition, which was something about which, for instance, Mahatma Gandhi was accused in 1922. And these guys face penalties of up to 30 years in jail. And this is happening. We are having political prisoners in Spain. Now, why should we have active politicians in jail when they can be in Brussels working for the recognition of the Catalan Republic? That's
or consulting lawyers about how they stay out.
Sure, there's half of the Catalan government that's doing exactly that. They're staying here and they're consulting lawyers to see how they can face all these accusations and penalties. But
and you don't think they should have done that before?
Well, maybe, but this is how it is, right?
So you're making it up as you go along?
Well, we have half of the Catalan government abroad working for the Catalan Republic, the other half staying here, facing whatever risks might fall on them. So I think that's quite a logical and understandable behavior, isn't it? And perhaps things have been happening in an unexpected way, and then you have to take decisions on the run, obviously. You can't foresee absolutely everything. Not everything can be planned.
Meanwhile, the Spanish government has outmaneuvered you, hasn't it? It's taken control of the region's administration with very little opposition, if any. Grassroots support seems to be ebbing away, doesn't it?
The Spanish government has actually bowed down to international pressure and pressure from other parties, because its plans were, and we saw that. I mean, we heard Rajoy speaking like a week ago, and its plans were clearly not calling for an election. And finally, it had to call for an election. And it's acknowledged that the solution has to pass through democratic procedures. So it has actually acknowledged, the Spanish government has actually acknowledged that by sheer use of force and by sheer power, they won't solve the question. So that's a development, and we read it in a positive way.
It puts them in the driving seat, though, doesn't it?
Well,
I mean, you say you have a state has been born, but there they are, they're setting the date for the elections. People are coming forward and saying, yes, they'll take part in the elections. Pro-independence groups are saying they'll take part in the elections. Two leading Catalan unions, the UGT and the CCOO, which had supported the referendum, they now back the elections as well, and they oppose any resistance on the streets.
As a party, we will run for elections. Obviously, we love elections. We love the ballot boxes. We defended them on October the 1st with our bodies, and citizens who followed this referendum were there trying to help people to vote. And they were being clubbered and they were being beaten up by the police. The elderly ladies, whole families there defending the vote. So we're not going to go against the vote. We're going to go to vote, and we'll try and...
Even if it's the Spanish state that's managing?
Because it now acquires a plebiscitarian kind of side to it. This vote will be a vote to show who has the numbers and who has the majority. So we accept it. They threw a glove to us. We accept that challenge. We have to do it. And we are democratic, obviously. We've pursued this always in a democratic manner. We're not going to lose that quality.
And maintaining all the time the fiction that you have an independent state, that it's set up and it's enacted.
Why do you call it a fiction? I'm interested.
I'm
sorry to question you. But
I'm taking the words from one of the political scientists at the Autonomous University here, Oriol Bartomeus, who said yesterday, I don't know if the separatists...
I can quote other scientists who say other things.
Okay, he says, I don't know if the separatists can keep up this fiction of being a real independent republic for much longer.
Well, you see, that sounds very much like the Spanish government's view, because they say exactly that. I wouldn't call it a fiction, in the sense that when Lithuania was declared, for instance, the independence of Lithuania, it looked pretty much like this. It took 1 year and a half to get an important recognition, more than 1 year to get any recognition at all from other countries. It
was a very different situation. Lithuania had been illegally annexed, and it was accepted that it had been illegally annexed by the Soviet Union.
Yes.
So a completely different situation.
Even more so. I mean, obviously in that case, the United States were kind of backing whatever was happening there. And even so, it took more than 1 year and a half for them to recognize Lithuania. So this kind of fiction went on for a year and a half.
That wasn't fiction.
And meanwhile, that's an opinion, it's respectable. But meanwhile, the Red Army was there. In fact, it stayed there for 10 years. The Red Army occupied the television, the administration offices of Lithuania. So it was pretty much the same. You could have said there, nobody recognized Lithuania. The European Union said it wouldn't recognize it. They backed Gorbachev in those times.
Let's come back to Catalonia.
No, because this is important. These international examples help us to put this into scope. But they help us to realize that it's not so strange. What's happening here is not so awkward. It's something very common. When a newly born country is born, it is fragile. It's unavoidable, and we are fighting against Spanish power. It's a very well-established state. It's a kingdom who's been there for years. And it has an army, it has a navy, it has financial assets. Obviously, it's hard. Obviously, we have a very little creature, and we got to cater for it, and we got to nourish it.
December 21, you're going to take part in the elections that the Spanish government will be managing. Are we going to see a continuation of some of the pretty questionable methods used by your movement before the referendum? I'm thinking of attempts to intimidate and pressure those who didn't agree with you. Are we going to see that before the election?
We've never seen
from
that.
Your side?
Can you give me precise example?
I'll give you a concrete example. Jordi Balat, member of the Catalan Socialist Party, the PSC, which was against the referendum. He described on Facebook the kind of pressure and intimidation that he had suffered for opposing the referendum. They called me a quisling, he said, a turncoat, a sellout, a coward, a wimp and a traitor. They've told me that I'm a bad Catalan, a moron, that I'm despicable, I'm a disgusting faggot. You proud of that sort of thing?
Not at all.
That's the sort of democracy you've unleashed?
Let me bring you my cell phone and show you all the comments I get there. Hundreds of them, calling me things like that or even worse. I mean, of course, there's crazy people all around, especially in the times of the global networks. But I think Jordi himself has not suffered physically from anybody. He has not been attacked. But
this is intimidation. This is straight intimidation.
Okay, how would you compare that, for instance, to the 1,000 people who were injured during the referendum on October the 1st, who were brutalized not by any crazy people, who were brutalized by the state police and by the Spanish military police? They attacked, just in Barcelona, 28 voting stations.
They have apologized for the violence.
Who has?
They
not
did.
Rajoy. Not Rajoy.
No, Enrique Millo.
Enrique
Millo.
Okay.
The Spanish government's representative in Catalonia. He apologized for it.
Okay.
He said he could not help but regret and apologize on behalf of the officers who intervened.
Yes, but Rajoy did the opposite, okay? So does the apology mean that that's justified?
That's a question you have to put to them. I'm just saying that
it's not justified,
they
obviously.
apologized.
So, but they did it. And apart from that, they have 2 people in jail for their ideas. They're being accused of sedition, again. Call it political prisoners. How else would you call it?
But I'm talking about the pressure and the intimidation. Núria Marín, mayor of Catalonia's second biggest
I know her very well,
city,
yes.
L'Hospitalet. She complained to ex-President Puigdemont about the pressure being put on her and her colleagues. She said, I told him what a lot of people are thinking. A lot of my colleagues are having a rough time. Putting mayors in the crosshairs won't fix anything. It'll just add fuel to the fire, she said.
Yes, look, who's being beaten up? Who's being put in jail? Who's being
persecuted? Who's being intimidated?
Who had to go to exile? Now, you're talking about people who are still there, they're in office.
I thought they went to consult international powers rather than going into exile. Have they gone into exile now?
Yes.
They have.
To pursue an international agenda. That's what governments in exile do. It's exactly that.
They run away to do that, do they?
Well, they can't do it here because they'll be put in jail probably, like so many other people have been dealt with. So I think, of course, any excess on any side has to be put forward, has to be condemned, and we do it. But let's face it, who has the power? And who's preventing people from voting? Who's preventing people from deciding something? And once they decided, who's preventing that decision from taking place?
But what did you expect the Spanish government to do? They have a mandate as a legally elected government.
It's not a question of expectations. It's a question of justice.
But they have a mandate.
Yeah, but we're talking about justice.
As a legally elected government.
No, let's be very serious about this.
I'm being very serious.
We're talking about proportion and justice. And what I'm saying is the Spanish government has never been proportionate, has never been fair. Now,
you didn't think they would trigger Article 155 and do what is necessary to defend the Constitution?
Well, unfortunately, we feared they would do it. But you know what Article 155 is about. The international press, your colleagues, called it the nuclear button. That was imposing direct rule. That's ignoring whatever elections took place in Catalonia before. That's ruling a place without going through the ballot box.
They offered Mr. Puigdemont a chance to address the Senate last week. He chose not to. They offered to set up a commission on constitutional reform. You didn't want that. Your foreign minister said it was just a distraction from the legitimate demands of the Catalan people. They said they'd talk to you if you just set aside the gun that you were holding to their head, which was your Declaration of Independence. But you wouldn't do that.
Going to the Senate to be jeered at, to be shouted at, that's not a very
How do you know they'd have done
nice
that?
outcome. Well, yes. And I've been there. I was in Madrid for 4 years, one whole legislature, and that's what they used to do to me when I spoke clearly. So imagine the Catalan president going there for that. Puigdemont offered, as you know, talks, and he suspended the Declaration of Independence on October 10th in order that it could be holding talks with the Spanish government.
But it was only suspended, it wasn't taken off the table.
With international mediation. He offered it. And Rajoy didn't accept it. The Spanish government didn't want to sit at the table. So there has been constant offers to talk about this since 2007, first with the Statute of Autonomy. It was completely cancelled by the Constitutional Court, who, as you know, is a highly politicized court. Then, the financial deal. The Catalan president went to Madrid to try and negotiate a financial deal. The door was slammed on his face. And then we offered to talk about a referendum, an agreed referendum. It was impossible, once and again. I was there in Madrid. We offered it 16 times.
Mr.
16
Bosch,
times, Mr. Rajoy, who was right there, said, no, we're not going to hold a vote on this.
Mr. Bosch,
so how do you solve a question, a political question?
If that's true, why does the mayor of Barcelona, Ada Colau, who's been highly critical of your declaration, talk about you advancing at a kamikaze pace after what she calls your mistaken reading of the results of the Catalan election?
Well,
she says your speed has been the result of partisan interests, a headlong dash that has been consummated with a declaration of independence that doesn't have the support of a majority of Catalans.
Well, perhaps because she belongs to a different party from mine. Perhaps because she's not in favor of pursuing the freedom of Catalonia. Perhaps because she's ruling this city in coalition with the socialists who approved and who wrote with Mariano Rajoy and who agreed to decree Article 155, which imposes direct rule on Barcelona and Catalonia as a whole. Perhaps because she's in that line and she holds different ideas. But you're asking me.
But let's pick up
if you want to have an interview with the mayor of Barcelona, you ask for an interview with her, but you're asking me. So I'm telling you our view.
Let's pick up our point about the speed of this drive for independence. The reason was clear, wasn't it? You've known that at least since June, when the Catalan Centre for Opinion Studies gave you an unpleasant wake-up call, it said that only about 41% of Catalans looked like voting for independence.
And how many against?
It doesn't say, 41%.
Only
only 41% would vote for independence. That's what they said in June.
Less than 41% against. And in between you have the undecided.
But you saw,
read all the facts.
But you saw,
please read all the facts.
But you saw that your support was waning, and you thought, well, if we don't do it now,
it's
not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So you rushed things.
We've been in this for 7 years. Now, perhaps some of the international opinion and attention has not been here for 7 years, constantly, but it was 7 years ago that we started this process. There were some consultations here, non-binding. Nobody took attention to that in Spain and Madrid. After that, we asked for the financial deal. Nobody listened to that. After that, we held a government consultation, non-binding. The result was very clear in favor of independence. So we've been doing things...
Which one was in favor of independence?
All of them.
In 2015, separatist parties won the most seats here, but only 48% of the vote.
Yeah, and how many did the unionist parties win? How many seats?
You tell me.
39%. So the difference was really quite remarkable.
Let's look at the polls in the last few days.
In between you have undecided parties who are for self-determination but not for independence. Let's explain everything.
Let's look at the polls in the last few days. Both show your independence movement with less support than the unionists. One poll in El País has 55% against the Declaration of Independence, 41% in favor. Another poll for Sigma DOS still has the pro-unionists ahead of you by 43.4 to 42.5, less than 1%.
You've studied all the right surveys. And I can bring to you some different surveys and opinion polls if you wish. But let's go to the actual voting. When people vote, they decided on independence, in favor of independence.
What percentage voted?
By 90% against the 10%.
What percentage? You're asking me about percentages. I'm asking you about percentages.
3 points more, 3% more than those who decided for Brexit in the UK.
It doesn't matter. We're not talking about Brexit. We're talking about 43%,
that's the
aren't
issue.
we?
That's exactly the issue. Nobody questions Brexit, even if the percentage of those who voted for separating from the European Union.
There's a big difference, Mr. Bosch. It was a legal referendum.
If I can just express myself,
referendum,
it would be wonderful to be able to express myself and say more than one sentence after the other.
Please.
If Brexit was voted for by 38% of the British. Now here we had 42% of Catalans voting for independence. Isn't that valid? Why isn't that valid? Why is it valid in one case and not in our case?
Your figures are wrong. 52% voted for Brexit.
No, I'm talking about the census in both cases. As you are, I'm talking about the census.
I'm talking about the actual vote.
Well, but we compare census
The referendum.
to census.
The
You want
actual-
to compare vote to vote, then it's...
The actual referendum.
Okay, then it's 52% against 90%. That's vote to vote. If you compare the same things, let's compare the same...
90% with one side not taking part.
Okay, but they were invited. Let me remind of a small detail. You had a ballot. I went there. I voted like any other citizen who wanted to vote. And you had the yes option, you had the no option. And you could choose. In fact, there were hundreds of thousands of people who voted no to independence. So not only was it possible, it was followed by hundreds of thousands of people. Now that made up only 10%.
So you're
of those who
claiming a
voted.
mandate, which the mayor of Barcelona, among others, is contesting. You've got...
Why is she contesting the mandate if she went to vote? She voted.
She said half the Catalans
But
don't
she
agree
voted.
with it.
Now, how can you go and vote to a binding referendum because the Catalan government said it was binding? It passed a law saying it was binding and how it was binding. And then you go to vote and you say that's not binding and you're not going to obey your own vote.
It's
that's
her
a
opinion.
bit. That's a bit bizarre, isn't it?
It's her opinion.
I know, but that's why I'm contesting her opinion.
Let's look at the opinions of the rest of the world, since your
Let's look at
leaders
them.
who fled
Let's look at
who
them.
are consulting with them at the moment. Antonio Tajani, President of the European Parliament, couldn't have spelled it out more clearly. No one in Europe will recognise an independent Catalonia. Jean-Claude Juncker also poured cold water on the enterprise. We're not in favour of letting Europe develop so that tomorrow we'd have 95 member states. 28's enough.
Let's go back to
This is clear enough, isn't it?
we want to be a
State.
recognised state. That's
Yeah.
why we're going for this.
You're going for recognition, but there isn't any at the moment.
sir,
the United States has made it clear.
yes,
The European Union has
exactly,
made it clear.
precisely.
Britain, France.
Exactly. You got it. If
All these countries are saying no.
If we were already independent, we wouldn't go for it, because we would already be an independent, recognized state, and we're not. And that's why we don't feel free enough in this political environment. The Kingdom of Spain, apart from being the most corrupt country in the world, has tried to prevent us from voting.
You haven't been to
Has
many
put-
then if you think this is the most corrupt
I've been
country in the
to
world.
most of the countries in the world. But that's not the issue. The Kingdom of Spain has tried to prevent a vote from taking place. It has given orders to the police to beat up people. You saw the images all over the world. Now, what do you think of that? Is that a place where you would like to stay in? Would you really like to stay in a place where they try to put in jail leaders, elected leaders, where they try to beat up your grandmas and grandpas?
They try to protect.
Is that a place where you would like to stay in?
They try to protect the law. Your big problem, your big stumbling block is the
no.
Constitution of 1978, which Catalonia accepted overwhelmingly,
Yes.
and which makes reference to the indissoluble unity of the Spanish nation. You're on risky legal ground here, and you know it.
But that's,
and you know it.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Don't you?
That's exactly why we want to change it. Because if we thought that was unchangeable,
You were offered a commission to change the Constitution, and you just laugh at that.
no. What's a commission if you compare it with the vote of the people?
First the
Do you
commission,
believe in
then a vote.
citizens? Do you believe in citizen rights? Do you believe in people's empowerment? We do. And that's why we
You think that's more important than the law? That trumps the law?
No, but we think that after 7 years of denials, of constant and repeated denials by the Spanish government, we have a right to propose to our people to take a vote and to decide on that.
One Catalan
Goodness
professor
sake,
of
we're in the
constitutional
21st
law,
century. We're not-
one Catalan professor of constitutional law at the Autonomous University, Teresa Freixas, thinks you're dead wrong. She says independence is legally just not possible. You can't simply hold a referendum and proclaim independence. A state has to be recognized by the UN. Without recognition, we would be just like Western Sahara or the Palestinians or Northern Cyprus. Is that what you want?
I know Teresa Freixas, she was a colleague of mine because...
She teaches this stuff.
Yes, I was a professor with her, very close to her, and I also taught about international history. And from there, we had many discussions. Now, my experience as a professor, as a doctor in international history, is that the people ultimately decide what they want to have, which kind of state they want to live in. And it's up to the people to decide that. And the laws can be changed. If you couldn't change the laws, we would still have slavery.
And if
we
you
will
lose
have
the elections,
no women's votes, no women's rights.
We're running out of time.
There
So
would be apartheid in South Africa. I studied the case of South Africa for a long time.
I just want to ask you one final question because we're running out of time.
Fighting against the constitution, against the laws, which were completely unfair, obviously unfair.
If you lose the elections, December 21st, will you forget about this?
Let's talk after the elections about this. We're going to win those elections. We have won them. All the last elections we've won. So why shouldn't we also win these? We're ready to go to the polls. We love the polls. We protect them with our bodies. So let's go there. Let's vote. And let's turn this into a plebiscite. We accept the challenge.
Alfred Bosch, good to have you on Conflict Zone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.